Yes.
Okay, well, once everybody gets their preferred seating, Roger, get started. Sure that's the chair you want?
Huh?
Sure that's the chair you want?
That's just, I was in the direct line of the wind tunnel thing there.
Okay, that's fine. All right, well, thanks to everybody for coming, and thank you for hosting us here, thanks to the interconnection. When I think this is the room that I saw when I met Rotha and we were planning this event, and it was like a big construction zone. Yeah, it's really, really quite beautiful.
Thank you.
So, we're here to talk about my book, obviously. It's called Cumberland Frontiers, and I have given a number of book talks since it was published last July to groups of all sizes. This is, I think, the perfect size. And I really believe very fervently and wholeheartedly in the message of the book, to the point that I become sort of a pain in the ass about it. A friend of mine brought this to my attention recently when she came to me and needed some advice. She asked me for some advice. She was undergoing some crisis in her life, and I listened to her and I said, well, you know what you have to do? You have to go out and create a personal renaissance and conquer your life's frontiers. And she said, you know, I wanted this plenty of front row seating available. She said, I wanted advice. I wanted, guidance and counsel. I didn't want a soundbite and book titles and jargon. This is sort of, what I got nowadays. So, but I'm going to try to get through the message of the book today, give you some of the thoughts that I expressed in it without too much superficiality. I'm going to start by asking you all to participate with me in a thought experiment. Now, a thought experiment, for those of you that may not know that term, is simply a way of concentrating on a particular subject, on a particular problem, on something you want to solve, and looking at it, framing it in a new way. The most famous thought experiment of all time comes from Albert Einstein, who, when he was trying to imagine what a gravitational universe would be like, imagined that he was riding on a beam of light. And by riding on a beam of light, he was able to figure out the secrets of the universe and to eventually develop the theory of special and general relativity. So, that's a thought experiment. Now, we're not going to ride on a beam of light. But I want you to imagine that you've woken up one morning and you've discovered that you're riding in a railroad car. You are seated in a very comfortable carriage on a train, right by the window, and you really have no idea how you got there, but for some reason it doesn't seem strange. You're not scared, you're not freaked out, you're not filled with turmoil or trepidation, but you're just riding on this car, and it seems very natural, and it's comfortable. And you have a sense that you are very safe. You're certainly safe from the weather. You're not being rained on, you're not being snowed on, it's not cold, it's not too warm, the temperature is perfectly controlled. When you want food, it magically appears, you have as much as you want to eat and drink. And you're just riding through fields, cities, you're right by the window, you can look outside, everything is beautiful. And it just seems like this is where you belong, right? Now, the world on the outside of the windows, you can see it. And, if you imagine what it's like to look out a window, your face is sort of partially reflected out the window. So everything you see is, in a way, filtered or distorted through the image of your impersonal identity. You certainly can't touch it. You can't feel it. You can't experience it directly in any way because it is on the other side of the window. After a while, you do start wondering about what you're doing there. Because there are a lot of things you don't know. You know you're riding on this train, but there are a lot of things you don't know about it. You don't know how long you've been on the train. You don't know why you're on the train. You don't know how you got there. More than that, you don't know how long the trip is going to be. You don't know where it's headed. And then it occurs to you that you don't know who's driving the train. So one day, you look up to the front of the train car and you see there is a switch, a handle, the kind of handle you can pull. And it says emergency stop. There's a smaller sign right next to it that says danger, don't touch. You can't understand why you haven't noticed them earlier in your journey. Emergency stop, stop the train, what would that be like? Would the train crash? Would you survive? Would it be fun or would it be scary to stop the train? And if the train stopped, could you actually get off? And if you did, could you ever get back on again? Could you make it start, or would you forever be stranded someplace strange on the frontier of a wild uncertainty? And so, day after day, sunrise after sunrise, you look at the switch that says emergency stop, and you do nothing. Nothing but wonder and ride the train. You stare out the window and watch the world escape your grasp, one immaterial glimpse of present at a time. The ever-fleeting rush and roar of now. Because that is what I call in the book the imaginary train, and it is a metaphor for the way many people live their lives, right? You wake up one morning and you're just barreling through life, and you don't know how you got onto the path that you're on. You don't know when it started. You sure don't know how long you got. And you feel that you're not in control. You're not driving your own train anymore. When you stop the train, when you pull the emergency stop switch, you can get off the train, and then for the first time you can live out in the real world. The world of authenticity, the world of a fully integrated life. This is what I call conquering your life's frontiers. Because make no mistake about it, stopping the train, getting off the train is comfortable and safe and secure, and you know it, you get used to it. Stopping the train, getting off the train car, going outside is risky. It's risky. Now, I call it a frontier because the concept of a frontier, in terms of history and geography and personal development, anthropology, all these academic and scientific fields, a frontier is always the dividing line between what is old and what is new. But not just old and new, it is the dividing line between what is well known and civilized and settled and safe, and what is unknown and wild and uncertain. Back in the days of the ancient map makers, if you've ever seen one of these ancient maps, there will be a dividing line between the civilized world and then what they call terra incognita, the land that wasn't known, that wasn't understood. And the map makers would write a inscription on it in Latin, and it would say, Hic sunt dracones. This is where the dragons live. Because being on the other side of the frontier was really dangerous. And if you went there, you were taking a risk. And it's the same way about your personal frontier. If you leave the place where you are now in your life and go someplace else, it can be wonderful and invigorating and life-changing and fantastic, but it is risky and it can be scary. It can be scary. So that's one of the stories I tell in the book. Now, I also tell my own personal story, so I'll just give you the backstory in a few sentences. I was born in a town called Danbury, Connecticut. I came from a very, very poor family. If you think about New England and picture the New England town of your, Courier knives, Christmas cards with the brick houses and the curly queue of smoke and the fieldstone fences, and, you know, that's New Milford. That was about 10 miles away. Danbury was dirty and filthy, and the sidewalks were cracked, and it was an industrial town. It was filled with smoke and smog. And that's where the poor people lived, and I was one of them. A very dysfunctional upbringing. But eventually, I got out, and the next thing I knew, I was riding the train. I got scholarships to college and to law school, and I had become a success, and I was doing well, and I had my own practice for many years, and I was listed in all these books with great sounding titles, The Best Lawyers of America and Who's Who in the Law. And eventually I joined a prominent law firm. I had a huge corner office. I was handling big cases, making a lot of money. I was in the papers all the time. It was great. Great, except for one thing. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it. And I had so much, you know, so many blessings that to feel dissatisfied felt immoral, really. Immoral, unethical, certainly ungrateful. But I realized there was more to it than that. I wasn't just being an ingrate. There was something missing from my life. So, one day, I sort of came face to face with what it was. I looked in my mail, and one of the things that came to me in the mail was an alumni bulletin from my college. When I was in college, I was an English major, and it was my intention to go to graduate school, get a PhD, become an English professor, and teach. And that's what I wanted to do, but I got talked out of it. The job market was bad. They were not, you know, the academic employment scene was really disastrous. So I didn't do that, and instead I went to law school and I got on the train. But as I read this magazine, I saw there was an article in there about a guy who was in my class in college. And in the book I call him Fred. That's not his name. Fred was sitting at a table, and he was wearing a pair of cargo shorts and a denim shirt, and he had done exactly what I wanted to do. He had gone to graduate school, he had gotten his PhD, he was now a full professor at a major university, he was an international scholar of literature. He had just published his third or fourth book of poetry. The magazine wrote a feature story about him, complete with photographs, and he was sitting at a table with a seminar of really interested and engaged and attentive students, and he was gesticulating with his hands, and you could tell they were really into them, and he looked happy. As happy as I would have been if I was Fred. And I realized that there was a time many years ago that he and I were like this. We were exactly the same. He had done what I wanted to do. There was not any reason in the world that I couldn't have done. Right? We started from exactly the same spot. He had just run in a different direction than I did. And that told me that if Fred could do it, I could do it, even though I was going to get started late. But how am I going to do that? I've got 2 kids. One of them was in college, the other one was in graduate school. I was paying expensive tuition. I had this big practice. I had people that were relying on me. I had a staff. I had clients. I had other lawyers. So I just wasn't sure that I was going to work out. So I had a chance. It was 2011. I had a chance to go on a trip with a friend of mine who was an art historian. She was taking a group of students to on a tour of places that were important in the history of the Italian Renaissance. So she asked if I'd like to go along. I said sure. It was a great trip. But one day, it was in the summer, and it was really hot, and one day we were in Florence. And we'd been walking all day, so on my way back to the hotel I found this little bar, which I do from time to time. And I sat there and was having a couple of beers. It was an Irish pub, drinking Park Lager in Florence. And right across the street, there was a cathedral. and we had seen it as part of our tour. And I realized, as I was sitting there wondering, what am I going to do? Am I going to go back to this life that really is very unfulfilling? That's not what I'm going to do. I realized that the Italian Renaissance had started about 10 feet away from where I was sitting, right across the street. Now, if you know anything about Renaissance history, the Renaissance was an explosion of innovation and novelty and new ways of thinking and art and science and philosophy. And, you know, eventually it brought us Shakespeare and Newton and Michelangelo. You know, the whole world changed when the Renaissance happened. The whole world had changed right where I was sitting. Right where I was sitting, the world had changed. And I figured if the world can change right here, then my world can change here too. And I walked outside, and I'll never forget this, it was like a blazing sunny day. And from that moment, I was not a disgruntled lawyer that wished he was a professor. I was a doctor of philosophy in process. I had changed my whole life. Now, there's more to it than that, and I talk about it in the book, and I'm going to get into some of it later during this talk. But when I went home and I started doing the things that I had to do in order to make this happen, I found that I had two reactions from people that I would tell about this. So, Spiro, you're going to give up this great practice? You're going to give up being a lawyer and go to be a college professor or something? That's what I'm going to do. Well, half the people that I would say that to would think I was insane. And maybe I was. The other half would say something like this: man, I envy you because I have always wanted to do or be or achieve blank. It could have been anything. I told this story to somebody yesterday. He said, put me down for porn star. He was the first one, but it was always something. I always wanted to do or be, I always wanted to be a chef. I always wanted to move to California. I always wanted to play the guitar. I always wanted to, you know, go on a safari. I always wanted to do, be, or achieve blank. And I'd say, well, then do it. Go ahead, do it. I mean, what's the holdup? Just do it. Oh, no, I can't do it. Why not? Because of blank. I can't do it. I've got kids. I'm too young. I'm too old. I'm too rich. I'm too poor. I'm too this. I can't do it. It's not the time's not right. It's too early. It's too late. No. You can do it, and the proof that you can do it is that I'm doing it. If you need proof that you can change your life for the better, just look at me. If you need proof you can fill in the second blank, look at me, because I am doing what you want to do. I am Exhibit A in the evidence that says you can do what you want to do. Oh, no. You see, Spiro, you're nothing like me. You are blank. You're younger, you're older, you're richer, you're poorer, you're taller, you're shorter, you're this, you're that. You know. I'm nothing like you. Our situations are completely different. I can't do it. At this point, I knew that having the conversation was not going to go anywhere, so I would just walk away. But I had it so often, and it just had exactly the same format, like a script, that I decided I'd write a book. And I'd write a book explaining why all these people that get caught in the three blanks, why they really can do it, why you really can. Now, the three blanks, I think, are an important structure to look at this issue, this problem, this thought experiment, if you will. Because the first blank, I always wanted to do, be, or achieve blank, is really, really important. Because if you can identify the thing you really want to do, be, or achieve, that is critical to you. This is what I call your deepest aspiration. And I call it that because the word aspiration, if you think about it, has two meanings. Number one, it is a hope, something to be striven for. If you aspire to do something, it's what you want to do, something you strive for. But I'm not talking about something that you want to make your life better. I'm not talking about the person that says, I wish I made an extra $50,000 a year, or I wish I had a Maserati, or I wish I had a penthouse in San Francisco. I'm not talking about something you want to make your life better. I'm talking about something you must have in order to make your life authentic. The word aspiration means something that you hope for, but it also means what? It means your breath. Your aspiration's got to be something that you need as much as your next breath. And once you identify that, you're on your way. But that is something that is critical to you, because I firmly believe that in everybody's life there is something that they want or need so badly that until they have that, they can never achieve anything else. They can never achieve the rest of happiness until they are happy with that one thing. It's as if that one thing is a log jam, like it has dammed the river of their life, and they've got to blow the dam before they can flow through a life that is fully integrated and authentic and happy and real. Now, since I wrote the book, I've had a few interviews, and I've done talks like this, and I usually have questions and answers. And someone once said to me, I read the book, and I liked it, and it really resonated with me because I've always thought there was something missing from my life, but I don't know what it is. And I said, no, that's not true. If you know there's something missing from your life, you know what it is. You know what it is. If you didn't know what it is, you wouldn't recognize that it was missing. You wouldn't appreciate its absence. Now, you may not know it immediately. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, my life would be fully authenticated if my car was green. But you have to pay attention to what your life is telling you. You have to pay attention to the times in your life when you feel a nagging sense of incompleteness. Something's missing. Something's just not right. If you listen to your life, it will tell you how to fill in the first blank. It will identify for you what is your deepest aspiration. What about the second blank? I can't do it because. Well, the story I like to tell about that deals with when I decided that I was going to write the book. I had to open up a bank account, a checking account for my business expenses. And I went to the bank that I deal with, and the branch manager was a really nice fellow, and he said, what kind of business is this going to be? And I told him, and he said, boy, that really sounds like an interesting book. And as we were starting to talk about it, this other guy came in the conference room, and he was the business expert of the bank. He was all dressed up. He had a perfect suit, perfect tie, perfect everything. And he was fit as a fiddle, and shaved head, and he had his laptop. How do you do, Dr. Lapis? And he sat down, he was going to tell me, what checking account I wanted. I want the one with no fees, or with a blah, blah, blah. So the first guy said, George, before you get to this, you got to hear about this book. It really is interesting. He said, no, I don't, no, I'm not really into that. No, really, this book, you just told me, no, I guess, so let's just talk about the bank. How much we're going to put in. Finally, he says, no, seriously, you really want to hear about this book? The other guy, who absolutely did not want to hear about the book, he gritted his teeth and he said, okay, tell me about the book. So I start telling him the story of the three blanks, and I got about halfway through it, and he puts down the pen he had in his hand, and he was like this, and he says, man, I have always wanted to be a bass fisherman. So bass fisherman. I said, well, then do it. No, I can't. Kids are young. No. I said, you're getting stuck in the second blank. I said, do you have any fishing poles? Yeah. I said, you know how to fish? Yeah. You got a boat? Yeah. You like fishing? Yeah. I said, I got news for you, my friend. I said, you are a bass fisherman. I said, you are not a banker that hopes to be a bass fisherman someday. You are a bass fisherman that has to work in this bank for a while because he's got kids that are young and you've got to pay the bills and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you have to reframe your life. You have discovered your deepest aspiration. If that's really what you think you need, if you come to work in the morning and you say to yourself, I should be out on my bass boat, then you are a bass fisher. And you cannot get stuck in the second blank. And he looked at me, and I don't want to say I changed his life right then and there, but I did. And he said, man, I really want to buy a copy of that book. And I said, man, I really want to sell you one. Now, what's the third blank? So the first blank is your aspiration. The second blank is your frustration. What is it that's going to frustrate you from reaching your deepest aspiration? The third blank is where you convince yourself why you can't overcome your frustration. This third blank is where your aspiration will go to die. Because by the time you get to the third blank, you've already identified the thing you really want to do, be, or achieve. You already know what could stand in your way. But instead of arguing against your frustrations and fears and obstacles, what are you doing at the third blank? You're arguing against your dreams. You're convincing yourself that you cannot be the person you want to be. And that's a bad place to be. It's a really bad place to be. Now, I will tell you that when people ask me what kind of book I wrote, I say, well, you know, if you find it at a bookstore, or if you go to the Amazon list and search for it, it's going to come up in the catalog of self-help books. But I don't like to think of this as a self-help book, because the self-help books that you and I have read, I mean, I used to read a ton of them, maybe you do or not, but they all have essentially two bits of advice, two approaches to, you know, what I would call achieving your deepest aspirations. Anybody here read self-help books? Yeah, okay. So the first thing they tell you to do is to engage in something they call creative visualization. Just imagine what you put it in your mind all the time. You know, believe and achieve. You know, so if you think about it strongly enough, you know, the power of thought, the law of attraction, the Akashic field, the laws of large numbers, something is somehow going to make the universe bend to your will, and you will immediately have what you want. If you just visualize and, you know, and I say about that, nonsense. If you had such mind over matter, brain power, that you could cause the whole universe to bend to your will, why isn't it that way already? Why is there anything wrong with your life, right? Why would any sailor ever die at sea? When that ship goes down, man, they are always visualizing the Coast Guard cutter to swoop in and rescue them, but some of them drown anyways. You cannot create a new world but creative visualization. And the other thing they tell you to do in these books is goal setting. Set a goal. If you're not working, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail, right? Set a goal, make it specific, write it down, read it all day long, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose. If you want to set a goal, go ahead, but goal setting is worthless. And it's worse than worthless, in my opinion. It's a little bit dangerous to your well-being. What do I mean by that? You know, I'm going against the whole goal-setting industrial complex. But think of what a goal is. A goal is something that will happen, if at all, when? In the future. If you engage in goal setting, you are by necessity redirecting your attention from the present day reality of your life, the life you want to change today, to a speculative future that may or may not exist. And here's what I mean. If your goal, for example, is to have $1 million, and you have $1 million already, that's not a goal. That's a wish. If your goal is to weigh 150 pounds and you already weigh 150 pounds, that's not a goal. That's a statement of your current condition. If you weigh 190 pounds and your goal is to weigh 150 pounds, now you're wishing that at some point in the future, things will be different than the way they are now. And there's nothing wrong with wishing. But there's no other part of your life in which you would assume that your wishes are necessarily going to come true. When you go to a birthday party and the birthday boy has candles on the cake and blows them out and wishes that he has a pony, you feel good about, the positivity of his thinking, but you don't expect to see a pony, right? You don't expect to hear hoofbeats in the kitchen. You know that a goal is a wish, and the wishes don't necessarily come true. So, in this book, I counsel against goal setting, against creative visualization. Instead, I believe that you should engage in something that I call resolve. Resolve. You should, at the time that you decide that you are going to do, be, or achieve the life of your aspirations, you should resolve right now, that you are going to allow your life to understand or comprehend or accept your aspiration into your present tense reality. The day I walked out of that bar in Florence and decided that I was going to stop being a lawyer and start being a college professor, I was no longer a disgruntled lawyer. I had resolved my life into something different. Now, what does that mean? Well, for one thing, resolve, unlike goals, is immediate. When you resolve your life into something new, you have changed it immediately. Right? When I did that in Florence, I was at the scene of the Renaissance. I knew that Renaissance meant rebirth. Right? And I knew that birth was an act of creation that produces something that is new and innovative and something that hasn't been here before. But it does it immediately. At the moment of birth, there is something new in this world, and it has all started with an aspirational first breath. This is how I describe it in the book. Think of the root meaning of the word Renaissance. Birth. A newborn baby breathes a first breath right then and there. Right? The baby does not put first breath on a to-do list. The mother does not set a goal for the baby to start breathing at some later date. The father does not write up an action plan for the baby's first breath, and the midwife does not circle a date on the calendar so that everyone can be sure that the baby's first breath comes right on schedule. No. The baby is born now. The baby starts breathing now. The baby's life has changed now, and so has everyone else's. The baby's corner of the world has experienced an instantaneous renaissance. It happened with the crashing immediacy of a brand new life that demanded attention and expressed a clear resolve to create a transformed world that did not exist before the baby raised his or her voice. There can be a billion breaths in a single human life, and each one follows the last one, and each one creates the next one, and on and on and on. They are as spontaneous and as immediate, well, as breathing in and out. They extend the baby's life through childhood all the way to maturity and then into old age, but they all start with the first one. Each one follows and owes its currency to that one. The resolve of life begins with that first deliberate gulp that claims as much of the world's free air as it needs to change the universe. Your own Renaissance life is much like that baby. It is born with your resolve, demanding your attention, creating its own new reality. Simple goal setting, hardly. So, that's what I mean by resolve. Now, is that enough? You resolve to be something new and all of a sudden you're something new. Is that enough? No, it's not enough. That's the beginning. In Conquer Life's Frontiers, I explain what I consider to be the action plan to get you to your new life, your fully realized aspiration. I'm not saying it's the only plan that will work, the only system that works, but I know it does work because it worked for me and has worked for others. After you have your resolve, what's the next step? The next step is something I call strategy. You've got to have some overarching idea. Think of it as the big idea of how you are going to bring your resolve into being. When I pulled the emergency switch on being a lawyer, my strategy and how I was going to become a college professor was that I was going to apply to graduate school. I was going to go to graduate school and earn a PhD. That was my strategy. Imagine that you are a basketball coach and you have resolved that your team will win the league championship. That is your aspiration. What is your strategy? Well, your strategy is probably we're going to win the league championship by winning the most games. We're going to win more games than anybody else, and then we're going to be the champs. Is that enough? Do you think you're going to win games if you just go out and say, this is our strategy, guys, let's go win a bunch of games? No. The next thing that comes after strategy is what I call tactics. And tactics means that if you think of strategy as the big idea, tactics are the little ideas. Tactics are the small steps, the incremental steps that you take to reach your final destination. Think of it as the American frontier. When the settlers landed on Plymouth Rock, they didn't get into their wagon train and all of a sudden march to San Francisco. They traveled one step at a time over one frontier line after another frontier line after another frontier line, a little bit at a time. When I decided I was going to go from being a lawyer to a professor, my tactical plan had 38 individual small steps. Now, I'm not going to bore you with what they all are, but there were 38 of them. If I had just decided one day in Florence, yay, now I'm a college professor, I'm going to go home and get a PhD, I would still be sitting in my law office somewhere wondering why everything had gone so poorly for me. After identification of your aspiration, forming your resolve, identifying your strategy, and then formulating your tactics, what comes next? Well, what comes next is work. You got to work at it. It takes effort. And I'm not going to tell you that it's easy, because in fact, it is not easy. It is hard. It is so hard, and it is risky, and it is sometimes dangerous, that you would all be well it would be a good idea for you to ask me, why bother? Why not just stay on the train? The train is comfortable now. Most of us have a life which, if it's not perfect, it's at least pretty good. We've been okay with it up till now, you know? Why bother? Well, the reason that you will bother is because after you get to the place you want to be, your life becomes much better. Now, I have a son who is a cognitive scientist. He's an expert on the human mind. And he talks about the human mind as if it were a city. He talks about it in terms of the cognitive real estate. You know, this cognitive real estate is devoted to memory. This cognitive real estate is where your smell comes from. This cognitive real estate is, you know, why you like applesauce. You know, there's a cognitive real estate for everything. And when I was making the switch in my life, I remember thinking, what is going to happen with the cognitive real estate of where all of my dissatisfaction is occupied? Because when I was a lawyer, there were times I was a pretty unpleasant guy. I mean, for one thing, I was worried all the time. I had clients, I did mostly criminal defense, and I had clients who were facing the death penalty, the loss of their life, the loss of their futures. I mean, really disastrous consequences. And I remember thinking to myself that if I was them, I would want to have a lawyer that worried about me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and so that's what I did. I was never out of the office, because I carried the office around with me in my, frontal lobes. What was going to happen to this real estate, this cognitive real estate that had the 24-hour-a-day, worry and anguish diner on it? Was I going to use that terrain to be worried about something else? My health? Asteroid strikes? The economy? Nanite invasions? I mean, what? No. What happened, and you will find that it happens pretty quick. One day, I realized that I was experiencing this sensation that I really couldn't identify. I had no label for it. And I was thinking over and over again, what is it? What's going on here? And I realized that what I was feeling was happiness. I was content. I was content. That's what you will feel. You know, I hear from people all the time that have read the book or heard me talk, and they want to tell me about, you know, when and how they got off their particular train and, you know, what it meant to them. I gave a talk one time. This woman came up to me afterwards and said, you know, my husband and I had a pretty good life. You know, we were on a good train. I had a good job. He was making a lot of money. We had a beautiful home. Our kids were raised. We had grandchildren. But we were like you. We just weren't happy. So we sold everything. We sold our house. We sold every stick of furniture. We put all our money in the bank. We bought a motor home, and we've just spent the last 5 years driving around the United States. That's all we did. She said, most of my friends think we're crazy. I felt like saying, I think you're crazy too. But that was not necessary, because that's not what I wanted to do. But she explained to me that once she had made this switch, once she and her husband had reached their deepest aspiration and made it come true, they were happy. You know, the best story I can tell you about, you know, freeing up this log jam and kind of letting your life flow into its natural course deals with something that happened on May 27th of 1953. And on that date, a young beekeeper from New Zealand became the first man to climb Mount Everest. His name was Edmund Hillary. Hundreds of people had tried to climb Everest, all men, by the way. Many of them had lost their reputations, their fortunes. Many of them had lost their lives. About 2 years before Hillary's successful ascent, the most famous mountaineer in the world was a guy named George Mallory, and Sir George Mallory thrilled the world when he told a reporter that he was going to conquer Mount Everest because it's there. I will conquer it because it is there. 2 months after that interview, he was dead on the northeast slope. Hillary, not being the kind of guy to make boasts that he might later have to swallow, saved his brag for the way down when he saw his friend George Low at the Everest Base Camp. And he said, well, George, we knocked that bastard off. Right. Right. What had he knocked off? What had he knocked off? We talk about people conquering mountains, but Hillary hadn't conquered the mountain. The mountain's an inanimate object, yet the mountain didn't know Hillary was there. Hillary didn't even claim it as a territory of the British Empire. He didn't change it by as much as a pebble. He left some footprints in the snow, and they were gone long before he made it past base camp. What had he conquered? What was the bastard he knocked off? The bastard he knocked off was his deepest aspiration. He had not conquered anything on the outside. He had conquered the internal terrain of his personal frontier. He had conquered his own life's frontiers. And after he did that, his creativity gushed throughout the whole world. After he conquered that terrain, but only after, he founded the Sir Edmund Hillary Foundation that built hospitals throughout the Himalayas. He built medical clinics, schools. He saved thousands, maybe millions of people from ignorance and disease and death and maladies. He became one of the most famous men in the world. Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential men of the 20th century. The Queen of England made him a Knight Commander of the British Empire. He flew an airplane to the South Pole. He landed an airplane on the South Pole. He crossed the North Pole on a tractor. He became one of the most famous and consequential men within 1,000 years. And yet, when he was an old man and he was interviewed, and a reporter said to him, "Sir Edmund, you've lived a life that other people can just dream about. What was the greatest achievement of your life?" He did not say, "The greatest achievement of my life was that I climbed Mount Everest." He did not say the greatest achievement of my life was the 1 million people in the Himalayas that are not dying from malaria and scurvy because of what I did. He did not say that. He said, the greatest achievement of my life, he said, I had a dream and I made it come true. And that is not something that often happens to men. He had conquered his life's frontiers. After doing that, he could conquer the world. Now, when you do that, you will notice a change in the 3 biggest areas of your life: health, wealth, and relationships. I'm not talking about monetary wealth, although that might come. And I'm not a healthcare practitioner, so I'm not talking about physical health, but I'm talking more about the spiritual well-being that you will accomplish once you have achieved your aspiration. And as far as relationships are concerned, I can only tell you that pretty much every relationship in my life has improved over the course of the last 7 or so years. But the best the relationship that you are most strongly and most positively going to influence is your relationship with yourself. Because if you are not living the life that you want to live, if you are not conquering the frontier of your own deepest aspiration, you will know that about yourself. And you will not like it about yourself. And you will not like yourself for that reason. And once you make this change, you're going to have a better relationship with yourself. Now, why do I call the book Create a Personal Renaissance at Any Moment, Even Now? Well, because, for better or worse, sadly, or maybe not so sadly, now is what you got. It is a trivial truism, perhaps, to say, you have to live in the present because nobody knows what the future will bring. And maybe you all know that already. I hope so, because it's an important thing to know. And it's true. And that was brought home to me in a crashing fashion as I was writing the book. I was sitting by my computer, actually in the process of writing things down, and I got a call that a friend of mine, a young guy, much younger than me, a young lawyer, had died. It was a Sunday morning. He had gone to a party the night before, come home with his wife, gone to bed, and just not woken up in the morning. He must have been sick. I guess he died of a heart attack, but he wasn't battling disease. He wasn't struggling. It wasn't one of these cases where he had cancer or diabetes or epilepsy or some chronic condition that he was struggling against. He just went to sleep and did not wake up. It wasn't an accident. He wasn't murdered. It was just died in sleep. And I remember thinking, boy, this is a real terrible thing. So I took my dog for a walk, and then I came back and I wrote this. This world where bad things happen is the same world where marvelous things happen. And some of those marvelous things are going to happen today, and some of them are going to happen to you. You are going to take a breath and then take another one. You will have a heart that beats, and you will have someone somewhere who cares about you. Somewhere there is something worth doing that is waiting for you to do it. All of that means that you must live a life in full today. Put off no good deed. Use your energy to be valuable and decent and cast aside grudges. Begin great endeavors. Finish everything that is important and nurture this moment. And then nurture this one. And then the next one. Speak the truth to others and especially to yourself. Make haste to be alive. Be aware that we have no warrant of tomorrow. Strive mightily and fail spectacularly. Then succeed wonderfully and start all over again. Keep no dream undreamt and let no important words remain unsaid. Take chances. have adventures, teach passionately, learn voraciously, risk fearlessly, and dare greatly. Forgive constantly. Believe in whatever you want to, but always in yourself. Search for wonders and discover them. Be prodigious in your appetite for amazement and swallow it whole. Let nothing escape you. Don't waste another instant looking at the world through a window that has your face spread across it in a fuzzy blur. Conquer your frontier. Create your renaissance. If I can do it, so can you. No kidding. Is today a good day to change your world? Of course. Thank you. So I'm really very grateful to you all for coming. I'll be happy to take questions. I think we may be recording this, so be aware if you'd rather not have your voice recorded. If you don't consent to the recordation of your voice, don't speak. But I have books that I would love to sell you, and I guess we'll set up either here or over in the store. But if you have any questions, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Christine, you got any questions?
Well, do you think a person can have more than one Renaissance?
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, the aspirations that are important to you will change, or could change, as your life progresses. You know? I mean, when you were 5 years old, what was your aspiration? You know, be in first grade, you know? I mean, things change during the passage of your life. And yeah, I think you could have more than one Renaissance. Of course.
From your experience in, I guess, chatting with people about this subject matter, what have you found is, if you want to call it the key to getting, if you want to call it flipping that switch from, you know, going from, okay, I know my aspiration, I'm clear on it, you know, and I've identified my blanks, but to get me to just take that first next step?
You know, that's an excellent question, and obviously there's not a specific thing. I mean, for me, I say I was reading the alumni magazine, and there was something about that. It was almost like flipping a switch. But I'll tell you another story. During the time that I was making this change in my own life, I had a friend who was thinking about making a change in her life too, and she had a very good job. She was a research manager for a major medical institution, and she was making good money, was doing really, really important work. And you know, there was just something about her life. You know, it was like the person I said, you know, there's something missing from my life, but I can't identify. She had this sense of nagging, you know, dissatisfaction. And one day she went to work, and she was doing the stuff that she did every other day, you know. It occurred to her that her office did not have any windows. Now, it wasn't as though the office had windows yesterday and somebody had, you know, bricked them over, but the office did not have, and there was something about that that was just like somebody had slapped her in the face. You know, I can't work in an office with no windows. You know, it just occurred to her that what was wrong with her life was her work. You know, that was the issue for her. So it could be something small. It could be something great. I mean, obviously we all know people, perhaps, or know of people that have had near-death experiences or have recovered from serious illnesses. And you know, I had an illness several years ago. And, you know, it was like one of these situations where the doctor says you may not, you know, see the next sunrise, and I did. And you know, that was sort of a Renaissance moment for me. It wasn't it wasn't the only one, but it was a time that I made some dramatic changes. So yeah, it could be anything. Could be anything. Could be hearing me give this talk. Maybe, you know, some people have said, you know, that you know, it really has changed the way they look at things in their life. Yeah.
How do you keep encouraging yourself when you've made the decision, you've recognized your aspiration? But those naysayers are really nagging at you and saying, no, don't, you can't.
Yeah.
When
well,
your own
those-
self is saying you can't, how do you motivate yourself?
Well, those are two different things. I mean, if you tell yourself you can't do it, and you listen to yourself, then you're finished. I mean, you're finished. You can't, you cannot fall in, that's the third blank. You cannot spend your energy arguing against your own best interest, or else you're done. There's no, that is the hopeless situation. I have no advice for you. Just, hope that train makes it through the next tunnel, because you're never going anywhere. Now, other naysayers, I call them in the book, I call them the dart throwers. Because there's all kinds of people that are going to tell you that what you're doing is wrong, stupid, impossible, immoral, unethical, impractical, unrealistic. They're going to have a catalog of reasons why you either can't do it, or even if you can do it, why you should not do it. When I was in the process of making my switch, I realized that there were people that I had practiced law with that deserved to hear it from me. I didn't want to hear it on the street. So I went around and I talked to some people, the prosecutors and various district attorneys' offices and judges that I practiced in front of. And a lot of them were very supportive. A lot of them were shocked. A lot of them were the ones that thought I was insane. But one judge was just furious, just livid, and said, there's so many cases of, there was a certain kind of case that I handled that almost no one else in this area handled. It's a certain kind of civil rights case. And she said, there's so many civil rights violations that need you to represent them, and you just can't do this. It is immoral. I said, no, I don't think so. I mean, I've done that. There's no law that says I've got to devote my entire life to something that is not good for me. So, and then there's the people that are occupying the position that you no longer want. In my case, it was the lawyers that had spent their lives and careers, clawing their way up the legal corporate ladder and had, achieved a position of stability and often wealth and prestige and privilege and power, and you could not have dislodged them from that place with a stick of dynamite and a 40-mule team. And when I said to them, I have what you have, and I don't want it anymore, I'm going to go teach classes at Hack, they took it as an insult. I was telling them that the life that they had designed for themselves was no good, and they were going to make me suffer for it by telling me that I was stupid or crazy, saying I would fail, So if I didn't fail, maybe I'm insane. Who knows? I can honestly tell you that it's a good feeling, It's a really good feeling. And in my case, it came 40 years after I wanted it to. But, those 40 years weren't wasted. I got 2 wonderful kids, and I had a lot of adventures, and good things happened to me. And I learned how to live a life that allowed me to live the one I have now. The skills and the talents and the abilities and the knowledge I gained during that time make me a better professor, made me a better graduate student. So, as I say in the book, if you wonder why you didn't pull emergency stop last week or last year or 10 years ago, don't bother wondering about that, because the train has already passed those spots. The train has already gone past those destinations. You pull the stop and you get out wherever you are right now, or wherever you are when you decide that you're going to do it. Now, you have to be careful. I'm not suggesting that you or anybody just, dash